Welcome to StanfordMed Live. I'm Lloyd Minor, Dean of Medicine at Stanford University. I'm honored to have the opportunity to discuss an issue of pressing importance with Arianna Huffington. Over the past 7 months, the COVID-19 pandemic has threatened not only our physical safety and health, it has also exacted an enormous mental toll. In July, a Kaiser Family Foundation survey found that more than 50% of Americans said the pandemic has negatively impacted their mental health, up from a third of respondents in March. To put this issue into context and discuss strategies for coping with the stresses and anxieties wrought by the pandemic, I'm glad to be joined today by Arianna. Although today we will be focusing on the pandemic's impact on mental health, I would like to acknowledge the compounded grief and pain being felt by our Black community as our nation continues to reckon with racial injustice, including yesterday's grand jury decision not to charge officers in the killing of Breonna Taylor. After today's program, we will be sharing resources in our community newsletter to help those coping with the mental distress of this latest development. A successful author and entrepreneur, Arianna has dedicated herself to enhancing mental health and well-being. In 2016, she founded and became CEO of Thrive Global, which uses an innovative approach to meet its ambitious goal of ending the epidemic of stress and burnout. With offices around the world, Thrive Global uses behavior change technology and media to build self-care and mental resilience skills. In 2018, LinkedIn named Thrive one of the most successful, sought-after startups in the U.S. Thank you, Arianna, for joining us for this important conversation in what has already been an extraordinarily challenging year. Before we jump into questions, Arianna, would you like to share any opening thoughts?
Thank you so much, Lloyd. I love being with you. I love the work that Thrive has been doing with Stanford Medicine around mental health and resilience. And today, before we go into our discussion, I would like to echo what you said about this difficult, tragic moment we're going through, which is also a moment of deep awakening around systemic racial injustice in this country. And I cannot even begin to understand, the pain and the legitimate rage in the Black community. At the same time as I've been reading what John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela have said about these extraordinary turning points in history, the nature of the response is so important. And while the rage is completely legitimate, if we can make sure the response is nonviolent, so that the change that we all want can be accelerated, both through the ballot box and through policy changes. It is such a difficult moment when the rage becomes overwhelming to make sure, as all the leaders of the civil rights movement have again and again stressed, that when we have the discipline to make sure the response is nonviolent, the change will happen faster. Just quoting Martin Luther King directly, nonviolence is the most potent weapon available. So thank you for opening our discussion by acknowledging the moment we're living through.
Thank you, Arianna. In 2016, you founded Thrive Global. Could you tell us about the inspiration and mission behind this venture?
So, Lloyd, there was a personal element, which was my own collapse in 2007 from burnout, exhaustion, sleep deprivation, hitting my head on my desk, breaking my cheekbone, going around from doctor to doctor, echocardiogram to brain MRI to find out what was wrong with me medically, and being given the diagnosis, there's nothing medically wrong with you, you are suffering from burnout. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of discussion of burnout. As you know, last spring, the World Health Organization acknowledged it as an occupational workplace hazard. And now we know that millions of people around the world are suffering from burnout with huge consequences for their health. I started covering these issues on the Huffington Post that I was running at the time. And in fact, by the time I left in 2016, 50% of our traffic was not coming from politics, but from people who wanted to learn how to lead healthier lives. But by 2016, I knew that we had to move beyond raising awareness to helping people take action. And that required a behavior change product. So I left the Huffington Post and launched Thrive Global. And we worked with a lot of behavior scientists. We are very honored to have you on our scientific advisory board. To come up with an enterprise app, a platform that is available to companies to help their employees help themselves achieve greater health and mental resilience.
Thank you. How are you thinking about your mission now in the context of this global pandemic?
Well, Lloyd, what is so interesting is that the pandemic really has accelerated everything around this mission, because health and wellness, scientifically based, that is very key for us. You know, we want to redefine the health and wellness category so it's not warm and fuzzy, but very rigorous, very data and science based. And that now has become central for every company we're working with. It's no longer actually confined to HR departments. CEOs, CFOs know that the mental resilience and health of their employees has a direct impact on business metrics. So we are finding that these decisions to bring Thrive in, to bring our product in, to bring the work we've done with Stanford, Thriving Mind around mental health based on your amazing brain science research with Dr. Leanne Williams, with Baba Shiva, Maya Adams, a lot of your great scientists, that work is now more needed than ever. We launched actually Thriving Mind in partnership with Stanford to Accenture's 500,000 employees in 8 languages. And there has been unprecedented adoption. And it's amazing to see how helping people move upstream, as we call it, and recognize the stress triggers, the biotypes, that if they are left unaddressed, become depression and anxiety, is more needed at this moment than ever before.
Yes, and we've already discussed about the pandemic and its effects on mental health. And of course, it's anticipated that those effects on mental health are only going to grow with time as this pandemic extends and as all of us adapt our lives in ways that 7 months ago we would never have even fathomed. How can employers work with their employees, work within their organizational structures to better promote the mental health and well-being of their employees, particularly in this challenging time when still so many employees are not coming physically to the workplace? And so our connections with employees are increasingly virtual, either exclusively or primarily. How does that shape your thinking about resilience? And how does that shape your thinking about how Thrive designs products and services that help employers to work with employees?
Well, the first thing, Lloyd, is our recognition at Thrive that companies are now the biggest platform for change. So the fact that we chose to launch Thrive as an enterprise product, not a consumer product, is not accidental. We believe it is much easier to change behaviors if you are part of a community. So what we are finding now is that leaders in companies are coming forward themselves, sharing their own struggles much more openly and vulnerably than would have happened before. And then what are the micro steps, as we call them at Thrive, the small incremental daily changes they're adopting to improve their health and mental resilience. And that gives the rest of employees cultural permission to do this. So it's a combination of these science-based micro steps and storytelling that actually moves the needle. If it was just nudges and micro steps, we wouldn't have the impact we are having. But because we give employees stories, both from within their company and outside of role models, business leaders, actors, entertainers they may admire and what they are doing, we are finding much greater adoption of these micro steps, which incidentally we call too small to fail. As BJ Fogg at Stanford has shown, when the changes are tiny, you are more likely to stick to them. You kind of build that muscle gradually rather than adopting New Year resolutions, which are too big and which tend to be abandoned within 2 to 3 weeks.
In addition to changing our interactions as workers, employers, we've also seen lots of changes in our family life resulting from COVID-19. We all love our families, but being with them for 7 months straight sometimes puts that love to the test. Do you find there's such a thing as too much family time? And how do you cope with that?
And not for me, Lloyd. I'm Greek. So having my daughters living with me here has been a great blessing. I don't know what they would say. It's definitely an unexpected blessing and much, much, much harder if you have young children in remote learning situations. I think we are finding that parents who have full-time jobs and young children to educate at home are having the hardest time. And the mental load is falling disproportionately on women. That's why we've launched a new program called Working Families that really helps working parents divide household chores and schooling as deliberately as they would manage their work projects. And that makes a big difference because the key right now, and the reason why this has been such a burden for women, is that we're still culturally inclined to have men be more likely to say, how can I help? Rather than how can I own this? And so we even have like literally digital cards that we recommend the couple share with each other of who owns lunch, who owns teaching in the morning, who owns teaching in the afternoon. So there's clarity. And that also prevents the kind of resentments and grievances that otherwise accumulate when there isn't a real division of labor and when couples are juggling young children with work commitments.
Understood. How can employers help with that? You mentioned men tend to ask, how can I help, rather than how can I own the problem and own the solution. How can employers understand the challenges that women and men are experiencing somewhat differentially, and then design work activities that respect those challenges and perhaps encourage that greater exchange of ownership outside of the workplace?
Well, what we recommend right now, whether employees are returning to offices or not, is what we are calling the reentry interview, so that every manager conducts that interview with their direct reports. Even if there is no physical reentry to the office, there is some kind of mental reentry, because we are post-Labor Day. Children were supposed to be going to school. Changes are happening. So we have found great success with this re-entry interview and asking, what are the biggest challenges you are facing right now? And how can we support you? Because often just expressing these challenges and clarifying what the needs are makes a big difference. Challenges can often be things like a spouse losing a job. Obviously the employees that we're dealing with already have jobs, but their spouses may have lost jobs. They may have lost loved ones. Loved ones may be sick. So being able to express that makes it real when we talk about bringing your whole self to work. If there is no space for that expression, it becomes much harder.
What are some of the things you're learning from these reentry interviews that you just described, and that you might share with people listening today, that the problems you've identified from the reentry interviews and some of the strategies that you've been able to develop with employers to overcome those challenges?
So we are finding with a lot of the big multinational companies we're working with, whether it's Verizon or Salesforce or Accenture or Walmart, a universal theme of employees being deeply stressed and anxious. I mean, you gave the Kaiser Permanente study, and there was a similar CDC study, absolutely backed up by our own experience. And that now is changing the way employers are thinking about this next phase, especially because Nick Bloom, the Stanford economist, just came out with a study that predicted 5 to 10% productivity losses. Productivity increases has been at the heart of the robust US economy. So 5 to 10% productivity decreases would be massive. And we are finding that they are very linked to stress. Because you can have the most technologically perfect video conferencing workflow systems if people are returning to offices, elevator protocols, etc. But if your employees are stressed out of their minds, their productivity is going to dramatically decrease. I mean, we had a new study from Yale, Professor Amy Arnstead, that shows that literally, when you are stressed, your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you move into a more primitive fight or flight response. So from that place, it's much harder to be creative, to be innovative, and to show up in the way that would advance the business. So even if employers who are only looking at it in purely hardcore business terms, the mental resilience of their employees becomes paramount.
Absolutely. What are you hearing from large employers on the productivity front? I know one of the things that I'm hearing, and just in our own environment, for example, where part of being an academic leader, a faculty member at a place like Stanford, is that faculty tend to travel and talk about the work they're doing, and from that disseminate their knowledge, learn things from others, and enhance productivity and innovation through the exchange of ideas that in the past has come from physically being in different locations. So we might have a faculty meeting where 25% of faculty who would normally attend the meeting are away and therefore aren't participating. And now we have virtually 100% participation in all the meetings because people are not traveling. How is productivity? I've read the study you've read about an estimate of 5 to 10% decrease in productivity in the out months and years from the pandemic. But what's going on right now in terms of what you're hearing from employers and the productivity of their businesses? And has the impact of stress and these mental health challenges, is that impact already being felt?
Different companies measure it differently, Lloyd, because what they are finding is that the hours that employees put into work is often increasing. More people are working longer, especially because of no clear boundaries between work and personal life. But how productive these hours are and how the law of diminishing returns comes in is something that I don't think is being tracked properly. That's why we launched a mental health resilience board for dashboard for management. If you think of it, Lloyd, it actually doesn't make any sense that management at the moment has a dashboard for everything, like sales, customer success, cybersecurity, everything, but no dashboard for human capital that can actually give you exactly what you are asking for. Like, what is the mental resilience score of my employee base? What is the burnout risk score? And our algorithm is fed data, anonymized and aggregated, of course, and HIPAA compliant, both from biometrics of the employees, like in terms of sleep, in terms of movement, in terms of social media and news consumption. I mean, that is another factor. If you're up in the middle of the night consuming news or binge watching, you are less likely to be productive the next day. But also, other data that's fed into the algorithm comes from the company. Attrition, any way the company measures productivity through sales or whatever the metric is. And then you can get a score, and you can look at the score divided by region, by department, and have interventions ready so that it does not become the danger that we see ahead now that will actually reduce productivity.
You mentioned that a lot of people are up really late at night watching news, doing whatever. And of course, you've written extensively on sleep at various stages in your career. And I was wondering if you could share what we're learning so far about sleep patterns during the pandemic and how employers might be involved in that too. In some of your previous writings, for example, you described companies that had offered incentives for workers that were getting 7-8 hours of sleep per night being measured and reported. How are people doing in the pandemic in terms of our sleep patterns, and how is that likely to impact our productivity and our mental health and well-being?
Doing very badly, Lloyd. We, in fact, have a new term, coronasomnia, which is, insomnia due to corona. And so one of the micro steps we highly recommend is a social media and news cutoff time. Pick a time when you stop consuming coronavirus and other news, because it's not good. And as you know from the amazing Stanford research, of course, Stanford has been a pioneer in sleep research, going back to the 1970s, and the first scientific sleep center founded at Stanford. So, as you know, the connection between sleep and health and performance is now so clear. And yet it is such a cultural shift from the way, we've lived our lives and bragged about how little sleep we need and how we can power through anything. So now we have this amazing data, and we need to both spread the word, because I'm still finding leaders in many of the companies we're working with who don't believe it, or who still brag effectively that I'll sleep when I'm dead. So the first step here is awareness, and the next step is giving people these micro steps. We are working with the leadership at Walmart, for example, and a lot of the leaders are talking about how the fact that one of our micro steps, as you know, is urging everyone not to sleep with their phones, because this phone is really not a phone. It's a nuclear weapon that contains all our projects and problems, and we need to separate ourselves from it to be able to surrender to sleep. So we had so many leaders recently, we just completed these webinars, talk about how just not sleeping with their phone and waking up in the morning and taking 1 minute to think or to breathe or to be grateful before going to the phone changes so much of how you approach the day. And these are also key to the mental resilience that we are talking about. And Lloyd, I want to thank you, because I first read about the work Walmart was doing in the galleys of your book, where you talked about how they are actually practicing what they call one better choice, which is the equivalent of our micro steps, with their associates, and the amazing results they had. And you quoted David Hoke, who is in charge of the wellness program, and I got in touch with him, and we started working together. And in March, we signed a 5-year partnership for us to be the exclusive provider of these health and wellness services and help them scale through our products. So you were ahead of the curve here, as in so many other ways.
Well, thank you very much. The book came out in March. All the proceeds from the sale of the book go to Stanford to benefit the mission of Stanford Medicine. Not too much fanfare because there was a lot going on in March, but I'm glad you enjoyed it, and it was a privilege to be able to describe the amazing work going on here by Stanford faculty. And I've never been more inspired in my life than during these past 7 months. People oftentimes ask me what keeps me resilient and healthy. I have a wonderful family that certainly is a big part. I've gotten back to playing the cello, which has been wonderful. But really what keeps me resilient and engaged is the people I have the privilege of working with every day, who are really making a difference in the world, and who, despite the dangers and the uncertainty and the anxiety associated with what we've been through and what we are in, still dedicate themselves to the mission that we have in Stanford Medicine, an academic medical center devoted to patient care, research, and teaching.
And I think what you wrote in the book, Lloyd, if I can turn the tables and ask you about it, around precision medicine and precision health, is so important at this time more than ever. And would love to ask you a little bit about that and how it has progressed since the book came out.
Sure. We certainly practice precision medicine here at Stanford. We're a tertiary quaternary academic medical center, and we deliver the most state-of-the-art care, and every day are pulling off some amazing medical accomplishments and almost impossibilities for people who have severe acute diseases. Our real goal, though, looking in the intermediate and long term, is to prevent those diseases in the first place. How do we do that? Well, we do it by being better at predicting and preventing disease. And yes, treating it after it occurs, but we think of precision medicine as being about sick care. And for sure, when you get sick, you want to have precision medicine. Today, the outcomes we've achieved in breast cancer, for example, have been based on the fact that no one with breast cancer gets an off-the-shelf treatment. Breast cancer is tailored to the receptor status of the tumor. It's tailored to the overall health of the person who has the cancer. And as a result, our outcomes are much better. So we want to practice precision medicine, but we also want to focus on health care, and that's what precision health is really all about. And predicting and preventing disease are the cornerstones of precision health. And that gets into topics that we haven't always considered to be a part of the mission of an academic medical center. Topics like nutrition, exercise, thinking about the social, behavioral, environmental determinants of health that have become so painfully obvious during COVID-19. They've always been there. We've always had data going back years in the United States showing that zip code is a better predictor of health outcomes than is genetic code. But the stark realities of COVID-19 in terms of its disproportionate effects on both incidence and on mortality in the Black community and the Latinx community, those stark realities, I think, cause all of us to look carefully, much more carefully, at social, behavioral, environmental determinants of health and making sure that we're embracing those as a part of our core mission, just as we're embracing the molecular, cellular, and device-related components of healthcare that we and other academic medical centers will certainly continue to advance as well. And in that regard, COVID-19 has pushed us all into a digital environment. In healthcare, for example, at one point in March and April, over 70% of our outpatient visits in Stanford Medicine were being done virtually. Prior to COVID-19, it was maybe 2 to 4%. Right now, we're hovering around 40%. We've had imposed upon us this need to adopt digital technologies very rapidly, and I think we've discovered that we can do a lot more than we thought we could. Getting back, though, to your thoughts about in the mission of Thrive, where you've embraced digital technologies and micro steps and the other things you've spoken about from a very early period in Thrive's history, long before the pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted both the design of those digital strategies you're using at Thrive and also their implementation and their uptake?
Well, like any time in history when you're going through a crisis, it's almost like a crucible time. It's a catalyst for fundamental changes to accelerate. As you know, Lloyd, of course, the crisis we are facing in health, like the skyrocketing increase of chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, or the mental health crisis, predate the pandemic. But now they're front and center. So we are finding that the adoption of solutions is accelerating. And also, being able to publicize the results is key. We are finding that people learn not just from scientists and experts, but from peers. So especially in our work at Walmart, for example, when we bought their original provider, Zip, so our new app for them is called Thrive Zip. And the results that you can see even on our social media accounts, Thrive Zip, Instagram, for example, will literally bring tears to your eyes. These are people who, through these better choices, through these micro steps, have lost like over 100 pounds and reversed diabetes. And to be able to see the impact of behavioral changes on real disease and health outcomes is incredibly promising. Because otherwise, I don't know if there would ever be enough trillions of dollars to address disease without behavioral changes.
Exactly. On a lighter note, this virtual world of interactions on Zoom meetings rather than in-person meetings, this world has brought us some unexpected guests in our meetings in terms of pets, relatives. I was wondering what are among the more entertaining uninvited guests that you've had in your meetings, and how do you think about that in terms of the role that these guest stars play not only in our home lives but also in our work lives today?
Well, actually, that has been one of the good things. that's happened, being introduced to colleagues and others, pets and spouses and children. And I mean, definitely the funniest thing that happened to me was a colleague's husband walking behind her in his boxer shorts. And all that is now part of our daily life. But also, we are recognizing the phenomenon of Zoom fatigue or WebEx fatigue or whatever video conferencing you are using. And we're actually working with Zoom to see about introducing a micro step that can help reduce the accumulated stress of the day. And as you know, Lloyd, we have this amazingly neuroscience finding right now about how it only takes 60 to 90 seconds to course correct from stress. That stress is inevitable, cumulative stress is not. So being able to take 60 seconds after a stressful meeting or simply after a meeting when you've just been using your brain and you want to recharge, just 60 seconds, that can change neural pathways because of how much more plastic the brain is than we thought, is just really amazing. And we are actually now bringing this into call centers. Next month, we are launching our first pilot of 60-second calls to call center operators that can help them course correct from the stress of dealing with angry customers. And so the call may say, "Thank you for what you're doing. Now take 60 seconds to think of what you're grateful for in your life, or take 60 seconds to stretch or to breathe consciously," and to see the impact of these interventions on the health and stress levels of operators, on attrition, on customer results. It just makes me so optimistic that we have all these behavioral tools at our disposal, and we just need to use them more widely. And science here can be incredibly foundational, and technology can be incredibly important. For example, you can use voice recognition technology to target these calls after a particularly nasty customer interaction, when you know the operator is stressed. So for me, we are at this inflection point with technology where we can use it to augment our humanity, or we can use it to consume us, as the documentary Social Dilemma on Netflix is showing, if we just allow it to make us more and more addicted to all the apps and social media we're using.
Of course, COVID-19 has also had effects on young people and children in our society today. What advice do you have for parents? Because the effects on our children may not be apparent to parents at this time. What advice do you have for us, particularly the parents of younger children, to promote the health and well-being of their children?
Well, that is such an important point because, as you know, Lloyd, there are educational milestones, and interacting with peers is such an important part of that. So now we don't really know what the results are going to be of this unprecedented experiment we are in the middle of. And how is this going to affect the mental resilience, the social skills of children? The one thing that makes me optimistic, as you can see, I can't get rid of my fundamental optimism, is that already we had a terrible problem of parents pushing their children to overachieve, to get into a good school, and the impact that was having on their stress levels. Of course, we are very aware of it in the Bay Area and the consequences that this has had. So this is a moment when a lot of people are actually taking the opportunity to look at what is it that they really value, what is it that matters in life, and to be able to bring that to their children instead of the constant stress of pushing them to overachieve, which is different than achieve, right? It's we all obviously want our children and ourselves um, to achieve, to have an impact, but not at the expense of our health or of their own ability to be to value what really matters in their lives.
Even before the pandemic, loneliness was gaining recognition as a serious health problem in the United States, especially among older adults. In a time that demands physical separation, what can we do to address the feelings of loneliness and isolation that I think all of us are experiencing to some extent, but particularly those older Americans are experiencing more?
Again, this is a moment, as Vivek Murphy, the former Surgeon General, wrote in his book on loneliness, when we need to look at a lot of our values as a society. We are finding that there's been such a almost segregation of all the people. And, again, I come from Greece, and, my mother lived with me and helped me bring up my children. So we're also looking again at how can we integrate all the people in society, how we can help them give of the gifts of wisdom that comes with aging, and help with children, caregiving, because one of the factors of loneliness is feeling no longer useful. When you're feeling that you're helping someone, it makes a huge difference. So we need to rethink all that. And it also, Lloyd, is connected with how much we value caregivers. And right now, we saw that caregivers, whether they're frontline healthcare workers or working at home to take care of patients, are truly essential workers, but they are not valued as such. And as we see looking forward, how many jobs are going to disappear because they're going to be replaced by AI, caregiving jobs cannot be replaced because they're based on empathy and compassion and this human quality. So that's another opportunity we have now to rethink how we value caregivers in our society.
Thank you. One final question. The pandemic and other recent events have magnified issues of self-care and resilience, but these challenges have existed for a much longer period of time. What does the future of self-care and resilience look like to you?
So, Lloyd, I would love us to see this pandemic as a portal. And as we get through this, we see it as an opportunity to reimagine and build a better world, leaving behind the things that were not working. And when it comes to self-care, one of the things that was not working was the frenetic, breathless way we were living. I mean, the fact that you are making some time to play the cello makes you a better dean. We need to make that connection because, for decades, ever since the Industrial Revolution, really, we thought that if you take time to do anything that's not about work, you are really slacking. You are not delivering your best. And, it goes back to our reverence for machines and then software. And of course, the goal for machines and software is to minimize downtime. But the human operating system is different. Downtime, whether it's playing the cello, going for a walk, reading poetry, is not a bug of the system, it's a feature. So to actually spread that view of self-care, we also need to redefine it in scientific and rigorous terms. And that means bringing in data from athletes for whom, recovery is part of performance, and role modeling it. I would love you to write about playing the cello. Honestly, you have no idea the difference it makes when really successful people write about the things they do for their self-care. That cultural permission is so essential for behavioral changes. So all that makes me optimistic, in the same way that the fact that we are talking about mental health and resilience, it's no longer just a topic that is discussed on World Mental Health Day, but every day, and that CEOs recognize as essential for the health of their business. All these are really opportunities to truly prove the adage that also originated at Stanford, that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So let's not waste this crisis. Let's bring about the fundamental changes that were always needed, but now their adoption can be accelerated. And let me just end perhaps by going back to the beginning of our conversation. I wrote a piece recently about how self-care was an important part of the civil rights movement. Actually, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks recognized that they needed to take care of themselves in physical and spiritual terms to be able to tap into their own wisdom, strength, and resilience and continue the battle for social justice. The more we are able to tap into that place of strength, the more effective we are going to be at accelerating the changes that are urgently needed when it comes to social justice and racial justice.
Arianna, thank you so much for joining us to share your perspectives on navigating this trying time. I hope today's event was informative and provides new tools to cope with the psychological and emotional burden that we're feeling. I also hope you'll join us for StanfordMed Live on October 15th for a special event in honor of Disability Awareness Month. Until then, thank you for attending today's event. Be safe, be well, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. Thank you.